My wife loves me. You know how I know? Because this was my birthday present. I don't think I dropped too many hints about what I wanted for my birthday this year. So obviously she's paying attention. This isn't any grain mill. This is the Maltzilla. This is the granddaddy of all grain mills. This was on my bucket list of things to get, mostly because I've stepped up to the 100-litre brew house, and that takes a lot of grain. And rather than buying bits and pieces of grain as I have been doing for the last few years, I'm going to buy grain in bulk and store it, and that way I don't have to make a trip down to Virginia whenever I want to put a brew on. I can just get the grain, measure it out, run it through the Maltzilla and brew. Happy days. And it's going to come in very handy shortly because I've got 10 kilos of malt to go into the 100-litre system to make a Mexican lager. So let's get it out of the box and have a look. So when you look at the unit, there's two rollers in here. They're both, from what I've read, diamond encrusted. One of them's stationary, the other one rotates. 1200 RPM motor, so that sucker really hauls. This rotating wheel draws the grain down in and passes it through the gap, and you need to set your gap so that you're not pulverizing the grain, you're just cracking it, opening it up so that when you mash in, you're just allowing the water to get inside the grain. You don't want to pulverize it because when you do that you create flour. Flour creates stuck sparges. Now I'm obviously going to have to read the instructions on this one, because if I set it up the wrong way, it's going to shoot grain upwards instead of drawing it downwards. The instruction booklet will be coming out, and I'm going to have to make up a base for it. So I bought myself a couple of buckets. So these are, I just got a couple of buckets from the local Super Cheap. They're probably not food safe, but that's all right because I'm just going to be milling the grain into it and then tipping it straight into the 100-litre system. So what I want to do, what I'll use these buckets for is I'll use one for measuring the grain out, and the other for catching the grain as it's passed through the Maltzilla. So what I want to do is build a little frame for this and just have the Maltzilla sit just above the bucket like that, so that as the grain comes through it's going straight into the bucket and there's no overspray. So that sounds like an interesting job. Now the other thing is, I imagine that this little baby generates a fair bit of torque. So the stand that I make is going to have a fairly sizable, not substantial, but solid base, so that when the motor spins up, it doesn't flip itself over. And the beauty of this thing is it takes this Anderson style connector, which is exactly the same as the Cannula Pro. So I didn't have to buy a separate power supply for this. I can just unplug the Cannula Pro and plug the Cannula Pro's power supply into the Maltzilla. When I got the Cannula Pro, I got the larger of the two power supplies that are available, knowing that it would be potentially doing this and this. This was on my bucket list. I didn't tell my wife that it was on the bucket list. She just figured it out for herself, because she's a clever girl. So now I'm off to do some woodworking. Now that's probably the quickest build I've ever done. When I plugged it in to see which way it spins, I was expecting from a motor that size to generate a lot of torque and quite high revs. What I didn't think about is you don't want high revs turning your grain into flour. You just want to crack it. So what they've done is put a low speed, high torque motor on there that just turns at a nice average rate. So as a result, I was expecting it to sort of push the thing over,
as a reactionary force to the way the motor spins. But because it's low revs, it doesn't actually generate that much force. So it didn't actually kick off at all. So originally I was planning on doing a big baseboard with long legs that were splayed out to take that sort of sideways force. But because it doesn't do that, all I'm going to do is mount it on a baseboard and sit the baseboard on top of my grain bin. Now, I don't have all of the screws in here because what I've done is I've built this baseboard out of ply. It's a marine ply, so it's fairly thick. And as a result, the screws that they supply you with aren't quite long enough. They just barely go through the ply. So they're not long enough. I'm going to have to duck down to Bunnings and grab a couple of extra bolts, slightly longer than the ones that come with it, just so that I can get that mounted properly. But it'll do for the time being. I've also put the hopper together. The hopper apparently takes 7 kilos, roughly, of grain. So that's, you know, a decent size grain bill for a 35, and maybe, I don't know, I've never done a brew in a 60-litre Brewzilla, so, but it's definitely going to do a whole grain bill for a 35-litre Brewzilla. So probably about half the grain bill at once when I'm doing a 60 to 80 litre batch in the 100-litre Brewzilla. But that's okay because I've got 2 buckets, 2 sealed buckets. I'll sit this on top of one. I'll measure my grains into the other and then just slowly tip to top the hopper up as it mills. I've put the output port on here. If you watch the instructions, there are 2 knurled knobs here to change the setting. Apart from that, it's all set and ready to go. So I've got the power supply. I've got a little bit of grain that I can test with, some leftovers from a Vehman pale malt that I didn't use the entire batch that I ordered. So I'm just going to run a test with a small amount of grain and just make sure that the gap on here is right for, you know, set for barley. Now, one handy feature of this that I found when I was putting it together is there's a little chute cover there. So you can push that to pour your grains in, and then when you're ready to mill them, you can just open the cover and through they go. So let's load a little bit of grain in there. I'm not going to do a lot. I've got to do a big batch tomorrow. So today is just a little bit of test grain. That should be enough. Plug it in and then open the chute. Now there are some grains that get caught in there, so okay, unplug. Now, if a man was sensible, he'd mount that to there, cut the red wire, and put a little toggle switch on there so I can switch it on and off. A man is sensible, so guess what's going to happen? Now let's just take this off for a second. Well, it definitely has worked. Let's get in there and take a look at it. That is a pretty good crush. Let's crack them open. It's broken the husks out, but it hasn't turned it into flour. There's still quite large particles in there. But nothing's come through uncrushed. Success! That's going to work quite nicely. Not that I can't get Hoppy Days to mill the grain for me, they'll quite happily do that. It's just that some of these grain bills that I'm ordering are 17 kilos. The hazy IPA that I want to do is 13 kilos of just the pale ale malt from memory. So 13 kilos is 2 bags, the size that they seal up for you. And it's much cheaper to buy it like this, buy the 25 kilo bag and just use it as you want. Keep it sealed and it'll keep for a long time. And it's much cheaper buying it like this than it is to buy 800 grams or 5 kilos of grain at a time. I don't know why I hadn't done it in the past. I did a comparison the other day when I was putting the hazy IPA recipe together and ordering grain for that. I put in the 870 grams of the various specialty malts that I needed, and it came out to about $8 something each. So nearly $10 a kilo for those specialty malts. And that's because it's under a kilo. There are price breaks at 1 kilo, 5 kilos, and then the 25 kilo bag. Instead of ordering 870 grams, which was $8 something, when I put in 1 kilo of the specialty grain, it dropped it down to $6. So it was cheaper to buy a kilo of it than it was to buy 870 grams of it. So when you're ordering your grains, just be careful of stuff like that. See if you just bump it up, see if there are price breaks, and if you bump it up to the next price break, if you're actually going to save money by doing that. Of course, I couldn't get them to mill it because it's the wrong amount unless I got them to mill it into different bags, unmixed. And then I could take what I needed from each bag as I'm putting the brew days together. However, I decided that because I'm going to be doing so much brewing, to order, obviously, a 25 kilo bag of the pale ale malt, but then 5 kilo lots of the other specialty malts that I'd ordered for the hazy as well. So the Carapils, the wheat malt, and the Vienna malt. I ordered 5 kilos of each of them because they're things that I use fairly often, and there's another price break at 5 kilos, so that makes it even cheaper. But that's it. That's a successful test of the Maltzilla. Thank you to my lovely wife. That's a birthday present that's definitely going to get a lot of use. Now I need to find somewhere to store it and some way to store it, because with all of these particles, it's going to attract rodents, so I need to find some way of just covering that top part up so I don't get rodents into it. And with the rodents come the snakes, and it's snake season. But that's it for this episode. I just wanted to set that up and test it. I'm quite happy with that. This baseboard is based on one that you can get from Kegland. It's a similar material to the chopping boards that you get from Kmart, and it's got all the cutouts and the holes drilled in it for the bolts. All I did with this was just measure the size of the hole, make a cutout, put the base on, and then just measured around, and then just drew around here so I could see where the bolt holes needed to go, and just put it together from that. So at some point, yeah, I don't know, I'm quite happy with that little baseboard. I don't need to spend 16 bucks or whatever it is on a piece of plastic. I can get by with that. That's great. Just remember, it really helps us out if you click the like button. It tells Google that this is valuable content, that you're interacting with it is a great thing. And also click the subscribe button if you're not already a member, and click the notification bell next to it so that you get informed of when we've got new content coming out. Where did that come from? I was down at Hiker today paying the boys a visit. This is their Vista Hazy IPA. It's an experimental single hop hazy. 7%, 440ml can, 2.4 standard drinks in it. It contains lactose. I think they've probably used a little bit of lactose in there to leave a bit of residual sweetness. Hazies do need a bit of sweetness in them, otherwise you don't get those, I don't think you get the tropical flavours shining through. Oh, I can smell it from here. As far as colour goes, it's a pale amber. It's a little bit see-through. It's not as hazy as I was expecting. Oh, tropical smells. That smells like holiday. And a flavour to match. It's high in bitterness, and I can taste the lactose in there. That hits me on the back of the palate. It's not unpleasant, it's quite nice. It's not as hazy, and it's not as... The Bolter, which is my favourite at the moment, has that real sharp yellow, you know, kind of egg yolk almost colour to it. Another great Australian beer. My only criticism would be that it could be a little bit hazier. I mean, I am used to those, I suppose, the New England style hazy IPAs at the moment, and absolutely loving them, where you do have, you know, it's quite cloudy. It's, but that's a nice beer. That brings us to the end of the episode. Enjoy the hobby, but drink responsibly. Get one into you.